The first scream sounded like a dropped glass, a thin, bright shatter that never quite hit the floor. Lena froze where she was, fingers hooked into the frayed hem of her mother's cardigan. The cardigan that still smelled faintly of cinnamon oil and laundry soap. The men in the living room did not stop moving. Leather shoes whispered across the cheap rug. Metal clicked. The tall one with the salt and iron beard kept his voice flat. "Put the phone down, Ms. Aguilar. No sudden moves." Her mother, Marisol, did not obey. She lifted the phone higher, thumb poised over the call button, and Lena saw something in her mother's eyes she had never seen there before. Not fear, but calculation. Like watching a seamstress measuring fabric under a dim lamp and deciding where to cut, where to save. "If you touch her," Marisol said, and her voice held steady the way a bridge holds steady when a train screams over it. "I call him. He answers anytime I call." The tall man looked amused. "We both know the only man who matters will come whether you call or not." "Don't hurt my mom," Lena whispered. But her whisper climbed its own ladder into a plea, and by the time it reached the top of her throat, she was crying. "Don't hurt my mom, please, please, I'll be good. I'll go anywhere. Don't hurt her." She did not look at the gun. Children know what not to make real. She looked at the little onion plant on the windowsill, the one they had started in a glass cup with 3 toothpicks. The white bottom just touching water like a toe dipping into a stream. It had sprouted anyway, insisted on green. "That was hope," her teacher said last week, and Lena had nodded like it was a vocabulary word she'd use later in a sentence. "Good," the tall man murmured, glancing at the plant as if reading her mind. "Keep your eyes on something that grows." He took the phone from Marisol's hand without force, without drama. "He's almost here," he added. The driver texted, "Private gate in 3. We just needed to be sure you stayed put." Marisol's mouth fought around a reply and lost. She closed it. She swallowed. The cardigan fell off one shoulder, exposing the old scar she never talked about. A pale crescent just above the collarbone, like a new moon caught in skin. Lena reached to pull the sweater back up, the way she always did, careful and automatic. Her hands were shaking. "Why are you doing this?" Marisol asked, voice low. "She's only a child." "So were we, once," the tall man said. And for a moment something in his face broke like light through thin clouds. Then it was gone. "Don't make me answer for him. He answers for himself in money." The car that pulled into their tiny driveway did not so much arrive as bend the whole street around it. It was black and silent and carried 3 of itself in its shadows. The tall man put his palm against Lena's back, warm through the cotton of her t-shirt, steering her gently, and she thought of bowling balls rolling down perfect lanes, how the bumpers keep the ball from disappearing into the gutters. She thought of her mother's hand on her back every morning crossing the avenue. She did not think of the word gun. The front door opened without knocking. He filled the door. His anger entered first, then his suit. The suit was dark, the fabric a kind of rich hush. His tie was not a color so much as a decision. Lena had seen him twice, maybe 3 times. Once at the water park 2 summers ago, where he wore a baseball cap and no one recognized him until they did. And then the water looked like money. Once outside school when a man with hair too perfect to be a dad had opened a door and she had seen a glimpse of the furious face behind sunglasses that did not belong to the season. And once, last winter, in the small frame next to her mother's bed, a photo from a long time ago, before hair turned and eyes learned how to hide. He was in that picture too. He did not look at his daughter first. He looked at Marisol the way a mistake looks at a mirror. "Tell me this isn't about the file," he said without greeting, without breath. Visceral fury stitched beneath every syllable like wire. "Tell me you didn't go back into that building." Marisol lifted her chin. "You said we were done pretending. I stopped pretending." The tall man took a step back and did not stand between them anymore. Lena's eyes moved like birds between telephone poles. She didn't understand half of it, so her mind invented stories to hold the silence steady. This was a play. This was a film. This was not real until someone said it was. "Don't hurt my mom," Lena said, louder now, because maybe that made things true. She stepped in front of Marisol without planning to, small chest out, hands into fists that meant nothing and everything. "Please." He looked down at her then, and the fury took one step back inside him. He did not kneel. Men like him never learned how, but he let his voice tilt. "No one's going to hurt your mom." He looked past Lena to Marisol. "Unless she keeps lying to me?" Marisol laughed. It was a terrible sound. "I kept you safe for 8 years. You kept yourself paid. I kept her alive. 1,000 unsaid years crawled across the air between them. In the corner, the cheap refrigerator coughed like a sick man. Outside, neighbors pretended to be deaf. The tall man cleared his throat, as if reminding himself to exist, and moved to the side of the door, gaze flicking, calculating exits and angles. The other two men stayed close to the car, open car doors framing their knees. "Where is it?" the millionaire asked. His name was on magazines and buildings, and the benches Lena was told not to sit on because pigeons favored them. His name bought judges and sold impossible things, like privacy. His name was Arturo Valle. Marisol's jaw tightened. She nodded at Lena's backpack by the table, the unicorn one with a horn that had peeled at the tip from being chewed during math. "In there," Arturo's eye twitched. "You put it where she keeps her crayons." "Where no one would think to look," Marisol replied. "Except you. You know me too well." The tall man moved before anyone else, swift, careful. He took the backpack like it was wired to explode and opened it on the table. Inside, pencils, a half-eaten granola bar, a permission slip crumpled enough to be a secret. He slid his hand under the lining and found the tiny zipper only someone unlucky or obstinate would notice. From that pocket he drew a ring-bound notebook no larger than Lena's palm, its cover a forgettable gray. It had weight that was not paper. Marisol watched as if watching herself be born wrong again. Arturo watched like a banker counting close. "Don't," Lena blurted, and didn't know what she meant until she heard herself finish it. "Don't take my things." The tall man paused. He looked at Arturo. Arturo shook his head once. "Princess," he said, and the word cracked him a little at the edges. "I'm not here for your drawings." "You came angry," she said plainly. He flinched a fraction. "Yes." "Then I want you to leave different." Arturo blinked, as if someone had turned a lamp on behind his pupils. He looked at the notebook in the tall man's hand as if he could see through it to the wires in his own heart. "Open it," he said. The tall man obeyed. What lay inside was not codes or bank routes or numbers that bent laws, though there were numbers. It was a ledger of a different kind. Dates, times, names, hand notations in a pen that ran out and came back in a darker blue. It was receipts and deliveries, but not for money. The entries were timestamps for visits to a small apartment in the north side. They were notes like L, fever, doctor said teething, keep cool compress, and M, refused transfer funds, threatened to call reporter, told her I'd make the call. They were phone calls made at 2 a.m., cab rides paid in cash, a description of a birth certificate whose hospital seal looked faint. A page near the back had a single sentence, written like a summary. "He won't let either of us be true at the same time." Arturo took the notebook and turned one page, then another, faster. "You copied it." There was admiration in his disgust. "You took my log out of my safe and made a copy on your nights off. You clever, stupid—" "Truth isn't theft," Marisol said, quieter now, almost tender. "It just looks like it when men keep it in safes." "This kills me," he said simply. "If it gets out." "I know," she said. "I didn't send it out. Not yet." "Yet," he repeated, tasting it like a promised poison. Lena watched their words land and sink. She thought of the time she had hidden a ladybug in a jar, and it had died before she could promise it freedom. She thought of how sorry she had been. Tears hot because apologies can't animate still bodies. "Why did you write she was teething?" she asked suddenly, small voice slicing the adult tension as if it were fruit. "I teethed when I was little." Arturo looked at her as if seeing a photograph alive. "Because I was there," he said. And his voice was no longer for business. It was for the past. "Because your mother asked me to hold you when the fever shook your wrists like birds trying to escape." "You never came after," Lena said. "Not to my school. Not to my violin assembly. Not when I got the certificate for reading 10 books. Arturo's mouth opened, then closed. He was a man who always knew what to say. He did not now. Marisol answered instead, careful. "He promised he would stay far away," she said. "We decided it was safer. For whom?" Arturo murmured, and the fury in him tilted into something raw. He threw the notebook down and it skidded across the table. "For my career? For your quiet? For the lie we all agreed to carry like a sleeping child every day across a highway? You wanted a daughter who was an asterisk," Marisol said, and her hands were fists too. Footnote, the story behind the story. "I didn't. The house had never held so much heat." The tall man had not moved. He watched the notebook on the table like it was a fuse. Outside, a dog barked precisely 3 times, and another dog answered with what might have been a laugh. A neighbor's TV erupted with a game show shriek, then muffled. In the hallway, the cheap bulb hummed. "I have to win an injunction tonight," Arturo said, voice moving back toward the polished terrain it lived on. "By morning, a hostile fund will file a motion to unseat me, and this—" He touched the notebook as if it might burn him. "Makes me human in all the wrong ways. They will turn it into leverage until there's nothing left but threat. They'll use you, Marisol. They'll use her." His eyes flicked toward Lena in a way, like looking hurt him. "Give it back and I make you uninteresting. I make everyone who knows your name forget it." Marisol exhaled. "That's not how forgetting works. It is when you have enough money." The tall man's phone buzzed, and he lifted it to his ear, murmured, listened. He went still. "Boss," he said softly, "you need to see this." He held the phone out. Arturo took it and looked. His face shifted the way landscapes do when light is strange. Valleys deeper, ridges meaner. He handed the phone to Marisol without comment. It was a link. It led to a private channel that was not so private anymore. A video feed opened. The frame was their living room. The angle from above the bookshelf where the plant tried to be an onion. The three of them were in the shot, and in the top left corner, a tiny red dot and the word live. Marisol's hand covered her mouth. Arturo did not swear. He did something worse. He laughed, once, like a man seeing the punchline to a 20-year joke he wrote himself. "Who?" The tall man's voice remained level, but Lena heard fear take a seat in it. "We jammed every signal when we arrived. Someone installed a shortwave relay in the wall, piggybacking on the neighbor's Wi-Fi. It goes out on a rolling IP range. I'll find it, but not in time to stop the copies." "How long?" Arturo asked. 13 minutes. Maybe less." "What happens in 13 minutes?" Lena asked, which made the tall man glance down as if remembering she was a person and not a problem. "People all over the city will receive a notification they didn't ask for," the tall man said. Remarkably honest. "They'll tap it because they always do." Marisol was already moving. She pulled a chair to the bookshelf, climbed, yanked the potted glass from its hiding place, and her hands flashed to the wall behind it, to the place where the paint was a slightly different white. She pried at a seam with a butter knife. A square of drywall came loose. Behind it, wires webbed like a spider's revenge. Something small and cunning blinked its lone eye. "Who put it there?" she asked. But the answer lived in the room like a forgotten song. Someone who knew when she was working. Someone who could come and go without suspicion. Someone who delivered packages to a dozen walk-ups a day. "My driver?" Arturo asked, astounded and not at all surprised. "Your driver," the tall man confirmed, eyes already on the door, a firearm appearing as if conjured from regret. He had access, time, motive, and the sense he deserved better. The money came from offshore. They paid him more than you do to hide a thing and wait for a command. He didn't even have to understand it. "Then pull it," Marisol snapped, reaching toward the device. The tall man caught her wrist midair, careful. "It'll spike broadcast for a half second if you yank it. Enough to send a final burst. Be surgical or leave it." "Be surgical," Arturo said, and the tall man nodded, pulling a thin knife from somewhere invisible. He went very gentle, very slow, and the room breathed with him. As his blade slid under a wire and lifted it to silence, a knock came from the front door that was not a knock. It was the sound of polite violence. "Police!" a voice called. "Open up." Lena's entire body went cold. The tall man did not look back. "We didn't call them," he murmured. "They called themselves," Arturo said dryly. He looked at Marisol. He looked at the notebook. He looked at Lena. In 13 minutes, or now, this room could be a stage, and the actors were all wrong. He made a decision in the space between a breath and a blink. "Ms. Aguilar," he said crisply, "you're going to open the door and tell them your ex showed up uninvited. You're going to show them a lease with your name on it and a restraining order request drafted on your kitchen table. In your hand will be a statement I just emailed you, which I've crafted to look like you wrote it yourself after 2 cups of coffee and a YouTube tutorial. It says you feared he would take your child. It says you contacted a friend who texted a hotline. It says nothing about me." Marisol stared. "You think I'll do that?" "I think you're the only one in this room who can place a shield between her and the next 15 years, he replied evenly. "I think if you let me do what I do, you get to keep choosing. I think there's a part of you that hates me for knowing what part of you loves that. You don't get to talk about love." "Everything we didn't do," he said, and his voice cracked in a way that made the tall man look away. "We did because of love. The knock came again. The word police was sharper this time. The tall man lifted the relay box, disconnected, dead. He slipped it into a pocket that seemed to be waiting for it. "Whatever you do," he said, "do it now." Marisol went to the door. She opened it. Two officers stood there, faces young and old at once, hands near belts, eyes scanning over her shoulder and seeing too much. "Ma'am," the older one said, "we got a call about a disturbance." "My ex," Marisol said through a throat that had learned to lie the truth. He came back. I told him we were done." Her eyes gleamed, not tears yet, but the idea of tears. "My daughter is scared." Lena, who had not learned yet how to lie without bruising herself, did the only thing she knew how to do. She cried. She cried with the whole weight of the situation pressing against her chest like a door you can't get open. She cried because the room smelled like metal and roasted coffee and old despair. She cried because sometimes crying is like pulling a fire alarm. Someone has to show up and decide what is really burning. "Don't hurt my mom," she said, and reached for Marisol's hand. The officers softened a degree. "Is the ex still here?" the younger one asked, peering past. "Yes," Arturo said, stepping into the frame like a man who knows cameras. He had removed his tie in the last second, which made him look less like a statue and more like a story. "I was leaving," he added, palms open, empty. "I should have stayed gone. My mistake." The older officer's eyes narrowed. He knew the face. Everybody did. It looks different from 6 feet away. More pores, less myth. He shifted his weight, and the lower half of his body made a decision the upper half had not approved. "Sir, I'm going to need you to what?" Arturo asked, calm. "To leave? I'm already doing that." He glanced at Marisol, a look that contained the map of a decade. "Ms. Aguilar, you have my apology. I will not contact you again." It was the right line. It fell into the right ears. The officers relaxed by one visible notch, because they had a form for this and an exit for men like him. The younger one cleared his throat. "We can stay until he goes," he offered, and his tone had that practiced empathy that lives inside bureaucracy. "That would help," Marisol said, and wanted to bite her tongue for how small she sounded. The officers stepped back to the porch, arms crossed, pretending to watch the street. The tall man slid sideways into the hallway, a shadow among lesser shadows, already making calls without moving his lips. Arturo paused on the threshold to look at Lena. Really look, as if memorizing something he didn't deserve. "You like onions?" he asked abruptly, nodding at the green sprout behind her. She sniffed. "I don't know yet." "They make you cry when you cut them," he said softly. "They also make everything taste like itself." He touched 2 fingers to his forehead and then to his heart, a strange little salute. And then, he turned and went down the steps like a man boarding a ship he built and hated. The police escort lasted exactly as long as it took for the black car to swallow him. Then they lingered, eyes flicking to Marisol, to Lena, to the room that smelled like money just left. "You good, ma'am?" the older one asked, and the question was not a question. "We'll be okay," Marisol said. It was, in the moment, true. After they left, the tall man reappeared from the shadow, like a note returned from a pocket. He set the dead relay on the table and placed the notebook atop it, then pushed both toward Marisol with one finger. "Your move," he said without menace. "I can't tell you what to do with that. I can tell you there are copies everywhere. Paper is an animal that breeds in silence. You could have kept this," she said. "You wanted it." "I want a lot of things," he said, and his eyes slid to Lena just once, just so. "Turns out some of them can't breathe around others." "Were you scared, mister?" Lena asked him. Children give grace like coins found in sofa cushions. Small, unexpected, enough. The tall man considered the question seriously, which made Marisol like him for the length of a breath. "Yes," he said. "Mostly of the very small person who just saved 2 very large ones by saying 6 words at the right time." "Which 6? Lena asked, tilting her head. "Don't. Hurt. My mom. Please." He let each land. Sounded like an order to me. He left them with a number written on the back of a business card that had only a name and no company. "If someone knocks who shouldn't," he said, "call before you call anyone else." When the door finally sighed shut on all that, presents. The apartment felt enormous, like the sound of a sea in a shell. Marisol sat. It was not graceful. She pulled Lena onto her lap, and the cardigan slid down again, and Lena lifted the shoulder back up, careful, automatic. They breathed the same air for a while, letting it prove itself not poison. Then Marisol reached for the notebook, opened it, and tore out the last page, the one with the sentence about truth. She handed it to Lena. "Read it to me," she said. Lena read slowly, lips moving, voice a little hoarse. "He won't let either of us be true at the same time." "What does that mean?" Marisol asked, though she knew. "It means we can be true now," Lena said simply. Both. In the weeks that followed, the city cracked. The live feed, killed in time to prevent a viral bonfire, nevertheless became a rumor that walked on fast legs. The driver disappeared, which is to say he was found and paid to smile. The hostile fund filed its motion, and Arturo's lawyers filed theirs, and the market pretended to understand which fact meant what, until it forgot why it cared. A small story ran in a corner of a Sunday paper about whistleblowing ethics in domestic disputes. A larger story ran on a Tuesday about the little girl whose quick words calmed a domestic event in the Vale neighborhood, which was a way of telling the truth without names. Marisol received 2 letters. The first was from a law firm that told her nothing it didn't need to, and promised a monthly stipend that sounded like mercy, but smelled like silence. The second was from a reporter whose hands shook in ink. She wrote longhand, that was her brand, offering to tell the story as it deserved to be told. Marisol wrote neither back. Instead, she walked to the kitchen, took the notebook apart ring by ring, fed it by moonlight to a pot on the stove until it turned to ash, and then placed the ash in the glass above the onion. The water went gray. The onion sprouted higher anyway, like it had learned something. When Lena asked what she was doing, Marisol said, "Growing a truth no one can buy." Arturo came only once more, months later, at dusk. No entourage. A man with a cap pulled low like anyone trying to be just a man. He did not step inside. He handed Marisol a slim envelope. "Her name is on the trust," he said softly. "No conditions. I've already denied it under oath twice. That's my sin. This is my penance." Marisol took the envelope without thanks or protest. "And yours?" she asked. He looked at the onion by the window and smiled, brief and real. "I cry when I cut them," he admitted. "I'm learning to cook." "Good," Marisol said. He hesitated. "Does she know?" "Only what matters," Marisol replied. "Which is that grown-ups are complicated and love is not an alibi." He nodded, put his cap back on, and walked away like a man who had accepted a life sentence commuted by time served. Not freedom, but something you could live inside. Years later, at a school recital where Lena lifted a violin's throat and coaxed a clean, surprising note from it, a woman in the audience leaned over and whispered, "She's so composed. How do you do it?" Marisol smiled without explaining that survival is a form of music you practice until your fingers never forget where to go. After the recital, they walked home hand in hand past benches with names, past large windows where small lives were displayed like ornaments in a store no one could afford to enter. The onion by the window had long since been planted in a community garden, where it had given up being itself to become a story about dirt. Lena pointed at the plot as they passed the fence and said, "Look." And they did. And there were green shoots where green shoots had no business thriving this early in the season. That night, as rain politicked with the gutters, a late delivery slipped under their door in a plain envelope. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, a younger Marisol at a hospital bed, hair stuck to her forehead, face a geography of exhaustion and astonishment. A tiny bundle in her arms, eyes furious at the light. In the corner of the frame, someone had caught the edge of a mirror, and in that edge, a man's shoulder and half his mouth, smiling like a man who had just witnessed his first honest miracle and didn't yet know the debt it would demand. On the back of the photo, a line, "Some truths survive even our worst selves." Marisol placed the photo not in a frame, not on a mantle, but in the bottom of the drawer where she kept warranties that never matched the lives of the things they promised to protect. She did not lock it. She did not show it to Lena. She waited. Weeks later, Lena found it accidentally, the way children find the past without looking for it. She studied the half-smile in the mirror, the curve of a shoulder she had seen in crowded rooms on screens, in profiles on bus ads, and she said nothing at all. At breakfast the next morning, she poured cereal carefully and asked, in a voice that made no demands, "Did he cry?" "Who?" Marisol asked, though she knew. "The man in the mirror," Lena said. "Yes," Marisol answered after a beat. "He cried. Like onions." "Exactly," Marisol said, and slid the bowl closer. "Because some answers are a bridge you decide to cross together, one small step at a time." When Lena was 12, a boy at school told her, in the careless way, "Sons of comfortable men do, that everyone knows where the money comes from, and that makes her a rumor, not a girl." She did not cry. She went home and took scissors to an onion she'd bought with her own money at the corner market. She cut until her eyes burned. Then she brought the knife to the table and set it down like the end of a long argument. "Everything tastes more like itself," she said. And they ate, and he became a footnote in a story told for other reasons. When Lena was 16, a story broke large and loud about a fund that had tried to ruin a city to win a bid, and the city had not cooperated. No one mentioned Arturo's name, but everyone understood whose shadow moved in the tale. He gave a speech about corporate citizenship that sounded nearly like accountability if you listened middle distance. The tall man appeared once on a talk show and said nothing, which is the hardest thing some men will ever do. Marisol bought a new cardigan and did not let it slip from her shoulder. On a spring night, when the first heat pressed its thumb onto the back of the city's neck, Lena sat by the window and listened to the old refrigerator try bravely to stay alive. She thought about men at doors, and police who arrive when the story is almost over, and notebooks that turn to ash and feed something green. She thought about the sentence she had read out loud years ago, and how it had been wrong, or maybe just sleepy. "He won't let either of us be true at the same time," it had said. But here they were, two truths breathing in the same room, not fighting each other for oxygen. There was, Lena realized, a third truth walking parallel to them like a sister. The one where love is a form of anger shaped into protection, and anger is a form of love taught to climb out of cages. She stood, went to her mother, and put her hand on that familiar shoulder. And when the cardigan slipped, she lifted it back up. Careful, automatic. Her mother covered her hand with hers, and neither of them mentioned the scar that had stopped, being a moon and become instead a line on a map that led home. On the anniversary of the night the car bent the street around it, a plant poked a green question mark out of the garden soil. Marisol and Lena didn't need to agree to know what to call it. They brought it water. They didn't ask who paid for the hose. Some mysteries deserve to be kept, not because they protect the guilty, but because they honor the living. If you asked the city what happened that night, it would give you 5 different versions depending on the bar you stood in and the kind of man you asked. If you asked the market, it would chart it with generous indifference. If you asked the onion, it would tell you the truth that finally mattered. That when cut open, some things make you weep not because they hurt, but because they insist you feel something all the way through, for once, without blinking. And if you asked the little girl who begged in tears, she'd tell you she learned that night how to make the future blink first. She'd say she learned to speak like a lit match in a room full of gas, not to cause an explosion, but to make everyone remember what fire can do when it is watched carefully and given somewhere to go. She'd say she learned that the men who walk in furious can leave changed, even if the change is only that they finally see the mirror. She'd say she learned that truth, like onions, grows again from what we thought we threw away.